Welcome to the second concert of Charlotte Symphony al Fresco. I'm Alan Black, your host, and I wanted to welcome today Jeff Verdon. Jeffrey and I are playing the Ignaz Pleyel theme and variations for bass and cello to start the program. And so I wanted to talk to Jeff about a little bit about the piece. But first I want to talk to you about the fact that you and I are now considered some of the old timers in the orchestra. I mean, we look good for old timers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Hey,
but
I'm
we're
in the
killing it with
clubhouse turn, heading for 60 years old, so I
Wait a
think
minute.
I'm okay.
You're not 60 yet?
I'm not 60 yet.
Anyways, we've been in the orchestra a long time, and we've done a lot of things together, but I love playing this piece with you. I've never played it before that I remember. You say we've played it before, but I don't remember it. But tell me a little bit about it and a little bit about Pleyel.
Well, you probably don't remember it because we probably played it 2 or 3 decades ago. But it's a wonderful piece, and Pleyel was kind of in the second tier of what we'd call Viennese classical composers. Composers like Hofmeister, Stamitz, Dittersdorf, von Hall, and they were really inventive composers. And what's interesting is they all wrote music for the double bass. And this particular piece, I heard for the first time being played by the principal of the Berlin Philharmonic. His name is Klaus Stoll, and the principal cellist of the time, Jörg Baumann. And they had a duet that specialized in digging up all this older music for cello and bass duet. And their recording of it is just spectacular, and I've always loved the piece. And so being able to play it with you is great. And I love the fact that when we get to one of the variations, and I know we'll talk more about particular aspects of the piece later, but there's one movement in particular where we're playing double stops, both of us are, and it sounds like 4 people playing rather than just the 2 of us. So it's really a beautiful, beautiful work.
It is, and so Pleyel was alive around the time of Mozart, because he wrote the theme and variations in 1811, I think, wasn't it? 1810, 1811, something like that, about 20 years after Mozart died. So they were all in that same genre and time.
Right. And unfortunately, he, as a composer, Pleyel as a composer, had really hung on to that sort of melodic, sort of facile aspect of composing music that Mozart sometimes gets a bad rap for, that it's easy, pretty music. And Pleyel was a student of Haydn, and Haydn lived to be quite old, of course, and so he hung on to that style of composing too. So Pleyel kind of, as a composer, lost some traction that way, but he made a lot of contributions to music in many other ways as well. So,
tell us about that.
He was a Kapellmeister, but when that started kind of coming apart and royal families and churches could no longer afford to have a house composer, he started building pianos and harps and publishing music and selling music. He also had what I think of as sort of being one of the first recording businesses in history.
Really?
He made music boxes. And so the music he put on the music box was his own music. And so it was kind of like a record company, 18th century style.
So tell me about one of the things that I first noticed when we started working on this piece. Well, the first thing I noticed, it was really hard for the cello. But the other thing I noticed is in the last variation, you have the most interesting harmonics. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, harmonics, first of all, it's a point on the string. If you'd imagine string stretched out between the nut on the fingerboard and the bridge on the bass, you can touch exactly halfway and it'll sound an octave above the string name itself.
And all you have to do is touch it.
You just touch it. You don't what we call stop the string, which is to press it to the fingerboard. You just lightly touch it and it sounds. And if you touch it at the quarter point, it sounds an octave higher than that. At the eighth, an octave higher. And then if you touch it the third, the sixth, you get different notes. And so on the bass, you can play lots of harmonics because the string is so long and it's easy to find the harmonics one from another. And they can have a very bell-like quality. So in this piece, what I try to do with the bow is to make them sound like little chimes. And so it's a really typical sort of technique for the bass that other string instruments can't easily emulate because the string length is too short. And to find those harmonics in between each other is very difficult.
Yeah, for us it's very hard.
Bass players need to be able to cheat because we've got all
Yeah.
that string, but it's also one of the unique aspects of the instrument that set it apart from the other string instruments. And it's during that time in the 18th century that bass players first started using harmonics widely and they typically emulate like a chime sort of sound or a horn sort of sound. They have a little bit of a buzz or a chiff sometimes when you first start the bow. And so it can sound like a horn note. And there's a very famous concerto by Karl Dittersdorf, and it has a big harmonic section, and it sounds like a horn doing sort of a hunting call or a battle call.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us before the performance of the Pleyel, and we'll look forward to that, and I hope you do too. So please enjoy the Pleyel. So I'm here with Victor Wang and Sarah Markle. I want to thank you guys for joining me for a couple of minutes to chat. And we're going to talk about the Mozart Flute Quartet in D major, which they're performing in just a couple of minutes. And the first thing that comes to mind to talk about is, Victor, you and your flute. You've got the most interesting gadget on your flute. I've never seen anything like that. Can you explain what that's for?
So this gadget's called the Wind Defender. It was invented a few years back, I believe, and its original purpose was for flutists who are playing outdoors, which we will be doing today. And And the idea was that because of the flute, unlike other wind instruments, you blow across the instrument. So if there is excess wind outside, it can actually disturb the airstream. Whereas other instruments, you just blow straight into the instrument, and so you don't have to worry about that. We're really fortunate, flute players were really fortunate that this contraption was invented, because now in coronavirus times, of course, we all have concerns about what direction our air is going and all our particles, aerosol particles. So there's a study that's being funded currently and in its sort of beginning stages at Texas Tech University to see the efficacy of sort of preventing this device's efficacy at preventing flutist airstream from, traveling far distances.
And infecting people.
And infecting people, exactly. That's obviously what we want to prevent. But in my own just anecdotal experience, it's been extremely effective, at least in, preventing the airstream from shooting straight out of the mouth, which is where the fastest air is directed.
Can you demonstrate for us?
Oh, sure, yeah. So just... and one of my concerns is that it would affect the sound, and my experience has been that it really hasn't affected the sound. They've come up with these very clever holes that are directed upwards that they did some nifty science to
So does that mean then
that
the air, instead of going this way, goes up and out?
That's right. Although even if I put my hand up there, I don't really feel it. I think the idea is that the flute requires air that is just so fast compared to most wind instruments, and without any sort of protection there, that it could travel quite a far distance. So I think even if it just slows down the air, that's already a huge benefit.
Well, it's very interesting, and I, in listening to you guys play, I didn't notice any difference in the sound. So
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. You sounded, as always, fantastic. So yes, bravo. So and that brings me to Sarah Markle, who I just am dying to talk about this because you said to me a couple of weeks ago that you've been working on something for the last couple of months because you've had more time, and I would love to hear you explain to me how you got involved, and it's about limericks. So please tell us how you came to be interested in this endeavor and where you've taken it.
Yeah, so I think, we've all had to find ways to occupy ourselves the last few months, aside from playing socially distanced chamber music. And so, I started a little business called Limerickery, and I've always had fun writing limericks just for friends and family about random things, just sort of to entertain myself. And lately I've been having them printed onto t-shirts and sweatshirts and mugs and just sort of gifty things and selling them on Etsy. So, and 100% of the proceeds are going toward organizations that really mean a lot to me. So there are some plant-based food initiatives and also animal welfare organizations like the Humane Society, the SPCA, those sorts of places. I have a few to show you.
Please do.
So this is a bag. This is a limerick about how, I don't know if cat people can relate to this, but how if my cat were a little bit bigger, I think she might try to eat me. Maybe it's just my cat. I don't know. I have one about how much I love coffee. You can read all of these on the Etsy store and also on Facebook and Instagram. This is one about never growing up all the way, staying young at heart. And this one's about how Canada is always just doing things better than we are. I have a Canadian husband who reminds me of this on a daily basis.
I bet
so
he does.
I had to write a limerick about it.
And so how long ago did you start writing limericks?
It's hard to recall. I think I don't know, for the last 10 or 15 years, I've always had fun just fooling around with poems. I would give them as gifts to people for their birthdays. I wrote a series for each person in my family on their birthdays, or Mother's Day or Father's Day. They were pretty bad, but it's just been something that's fun, and it's been cool to find a way to turn it into a way to support causes that really mean a lot to me. So.
Can I get a pre-order for my birthday next year?
Absolutely.
I'll even pay you for it. Oh, that's awesome. I think it's an amazing. I was thinking of all the people in the orchestra. I never would have thought of something like that as being something. It's such an interesting.
It is very
interesting story.
Very strange, but it's been really fun.
So let's talk a little bit about the Mozart itself. And Mozart, this is his D major flute quartet. And Mozart has written a tremendous amount of chamber music that is loved and beloved by everybody. And this piece is no different, and in fact, maybe one of the most popular of all his chamber music pieces. And Victor, I know you like to perform this and play this work. Tell us a little bit about it and what you love about it.
Sure. So we flute players are really very lucky that Mozart wrote so much great music for the flute. Sometimes people joke that Mozart didn't like the flute. I guess he wrote that in a letter to his father, I believe is the story. I think it was because the flutist who had commissioned him to write all these works didn't end up paying him or something like that. So he said he didn't like the flute, but the Mozart flute quartets are just some of the best chamber music that we have. And the D major one is definitely the most popular and probably my favorite. It's just got this sort of life and energy to it.
It's a very positive work. It's one of the things I love when I play it is the positive nature of that. And the D major, it's such a great key to play in.
It's very sunny and bright. And,
yeah. I wish Mozart had written cello in sonatas. We have nothing.
That's true.
Nothing.
It's true.
With all the music he wrote, he didn't write anything for cello. Kind of bugs me.
Shame on him.
I know.
Well, there's cello in the flute quartets. Yeah, the second movement I think is really special for flute players. I saw another flutist post it on Instagram recently, and I'm not quoting them exactly, but I think they said it was like one of the best pages of music ever written for the flute, and I totally agree. It's it's just really beautiful, and the flute is really brought to the foreground in that movement, and it's kind of like the slow movement of a really beautiful concerto.